A zebra stands in the tall grass of the Serengeti, utterly still. Its ears rotate independently, like small radar dishes, tracking sound from two directions at once. Its eyes, set on the sides of its skull, scan almost the entire horizon without moving its head. For nearly a full minute, nothing happens. Then, without any visible trigger, the zebra breaks into a sprint. Not away from a predator, not toward anything in particular, just away from stillness itself. It stops 30 meters later. Resumes grazing, as if nothing happened. To a human observer, this looks like paranoia. To a biologist, it looks like something else entirely. A nervous system calibrated by 4 million years of a very specific kind of dying. Because on the plains where zebras evolved, the animals that survived were not the strongest. They were not the smartest. They were the ones who never fully relaxed. Most people who think about this question ask it the wrong way. They ask, why didn't humans domesticate zebras? As if domestication were something humans do to animals, a decision, a project, a matter of trying hard enough. As if the horse said yes and the zebra said no, and the difference was our effort. That's not what happened. For most of human history, we did try. Ancient Egyptians experimented with zebras. Victorian England was, for a strange few decades, obsessed with them. Lord Walter Rothschild, a British zoologist with more money than social convention could contain, trained zebras to pull a carriage through the streets of London and rode them straight up to Buckingham Palace to prove it could be done. It could be done, briefly, by one eccentric aristocrat with one team, under one set of extraordinary circumstances. It could not be replicated at scale. And that distinction between a single trained animal and a domesticated species turns out to be the entire story. Because domestication was never a test of whether an individual animal could be tamed. It was a test the animal itself had to pass generation after generation without knowing it was being tested at all. In 2002, geneticist Jared Diamond gave this idea a name that stuck, the Anna Karenina Principle. Borrowed from Tolstoy's opening line, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. The idea was simple and devastating. For a species to become domesticated, it has to say yes to everything. Diet, growth rate, breeding in captivity, temperament, a resistance to panic, a social structure humans can insert themselves into. Fail even one, and the whole project collapses. Of the world's large herbivorous mammals, dozens of species weighing over 100 pounds, only a handful ever cross that threshold. Horses, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, a short, exclusive list chosen not by human ambition, but by a narrow biological doorway that most species simply do not fit through. The zebra doesn't fit, and doesn't fail in one place. It fails in almost all of them simultaneously for reasons that trace back to a continent that never stopped trying to kill it. Here is the detail that changes everything. Horses evolved on the plains of North America and Eurasia alongside predators, but predators that, over tens of thousands of years, either went extinct or were hunted into caution by early humans. By the time serious domestication began roughly 5,500 years ago on the Eurasian steppe, the horse's nervous system had inherited a kind of ancestral memory of danger, but the present tense danger had thinned out. The horse was, in a sense, given room to exhale. The zebra never got that room. Africa is the only continent where megafauna and megapredators evolved together, continuously, without the mass extinction event that emptied out the other landmasses roughly 10 to 50,000 years ago. Lions, leopards, hyenas, wild dogs, crocodiles waiting in the exact spot where the herd must cross the river every single year because the river doesn't move even when the animals wish it would. The result is not a nervous animal. It is a correctly calibrated one. A zebra that hesitates for half a second too long is a zebra that gets eaten. Natural selection did not build a temperamental animal by accident. It built the most efficient panic response biology has ever produced, and then handed that design unmodified to every zebra born for the next several million years. Humans didn't arrive to tame a wild horse with quirks. We arrived to negotiate with a species-wide alarm system that had never once been wrong enough times to soften. There's a story handlers tell, not a myth, a documented pattern, that captures something horses simply do not do. A zebra bitten a handler's forearm and would not let go. Not a nip, not a warning. A sustained lockjaw bite, the kind that in recorded cases has removed fingers, torn faces, ended careers. Zebras are responsible, disproportionately, for more injuries to zoo staff than lions. Not because they are more aggressive in the way we imagine aggression. Because they never developed the concession horses did. The willingness to submit to a dominant handler as though that handler were simply another horse hire in the herd. A horse can be convinced, on some deep instinctive level, that the human holding the rope is the new alpha. A zebra does not appear to have that circuit. It does not read submission and yield. It reads restraint as capture, and every part of its 4 million year inheritance tells it that capture means death. There is no herd hierarchy to slot a human into, because in the zebra's evolutionary experience, nothing that grabs you is ever trying to lead you. It's trying to eat you. You cannot out-negotiate an instinct that has never once been wrong. Even temperament aside, the zebra's body resists the deal. Domestication requires a nervous, fast-growing species to accept a fundamentally different arrangement. Contains space, unfamiliar breeding partners, generations bred for compliance instead of survival. Horses reach breeding maturity in roughly 2 to 3 years. Zebras take closer to 5 to 6. A slower biological clock that means fewer generations for selective breeding to work its slow magic in a world where domestication windows historically lasted only a few thousand years before the surrounding culture moved on to something else. Their backs, too, resist the geometry of a saddle. Zebra spines and shoulder structure differ subtly, but critically from horses. Subtly enough that a bridle can be forced onto one, but never comfortably enough for the sustained labor that made the horse indispensable to human civilization. Pulling plows, carrying soldiers, hauling grain across a continent. None of these obstacles alone would have ended the project. Together, stacked on top of a nervous system built by the most predator-dense landscape on Earth, they didn't just make domestication difficult. They made it a door with no handle. Here is where the story stops being about zebras. For centuries, the absence of the domesticated zebra was quietly folded into a much larger, much darker narrative. One occasionally invoked to explain why certain human societies advanced and others didn't. If Europe had horses and Africa did not, some reason, perhaps that said something about the people, not the animals. Jared Diamond's research, whatever its critics say about its scope, dismantled that reasoning at the root. It was never about the humans. Herding cultures across Africa are not less capable, less intelligent, or less industrious than their Eurasian counterparts. They were simply issued a different set of animals by geography, and geography does not negotiate, and it does not apologize. The horse was domesticable because of an accident of predator extinction on a different continent, 10,000 years before anyone in Eurasia had the idea to try. The zebra was undomesticable because Africa's predators never went extinct, which means, in a strange twist, that the very thing that makes African wildlife so famously, spectacularly alive today is the same force that kept one of its most iconic animals forever out of human hands. There's a final detail that unsettles more than it should. We used to assume the zebra's stripes existed to confuse predators, a kind of visual camouflage, breaking up the outline of the herd so a lion couldn't isolate a single target. Recent research complicates that story. Some evidence now points towards something almost mundane by comparison. The stripes may exist primarily to repel biting flies, insects that carry diseases capable of killing a zebra far more efficiently than any lion. Which means even the animal's most iconic, most photographed feature was never really about grandeur. It was about survival math, running silently in the background, the same as everything else about this species. The panic response. The bite that doesn't release. The refusal to submit. None of it evolved to be beautiful. All of it evolved because the alternative was death, repeated across 100,000 generations, until there was no room left in the zebra's biology for anything softer. Step back far enough, and the zebra stops being a story about one animal that resisted the leash. It becomes a story about the outer edge of what domestication, and by extension, what human control, was ever actually capable of. We tend to imagine our relationship with the natural world as a slow, one-directional conquest. Given enough time, enough patience, enough ingenuity, anything wild eventually bends. The zebra says otherwise. It suggests that some doors were never opened to begin with. Not because we lack the will, but because 4 million years of an uninterrupted predator-prey arms race had already decided the outcome before the first human ever picked up a rope. Every zebra alive today is still running that same calibration, still scanning the horizon, still breaking into a sprint for no visible reason, because somewhere in its inheritance, stillness has always meant danger. We call it wild. It might be more accurate to call it undefeated.